Today, we're talking about a man named Pablo López Alavez. He's an indigenous environmental defender, someone who fought to protect his ancestral lands. But this story doesn't have a happy ending. His fight? Well, it landed him in a prison cell.
Yeah, 15 years. Just think about that for a second. That's how long the Zapotec community leader has been locked away. We're talking more than 5,400 days without his freedom. And you have to ask, why? How did this happen?
And that really is the central question, isn't it? It's one Pablo himself asks from inside his prison cell in Oaxaca, Mexico. To even begin to understand how he got there, we need to rewind the clock. We've got to go way back, long before any arrest, to a conflict that was brewing deep in the forest.
So our story really kicks off in the mountains of Oaxaca. At its heart, it's a dispute over who actually has the right to the forest, and maybe more importantly, what it really means to protect it.
You know, this tension didn't just pop up out of nowhere. It had been simmering since the 80s, all centered on logging rights. And for 20 years, Pablo López Alavez was a major figure in his community, pushing back against deforestation. But then in 2007, something terrible happens. Two people from a neighboring community are killed. And fast forward 3 years, and Pablo, the guy fighting for the forest, is suddenly abducted and blamed for those same murders.
And this quote, it really gets to the very core of why he was doing this. For Pablo and his community, this was never just about some legal papers or land titles. No, this was about the future. That forest was everything. It was their water, their legacy. He saw its destruction as a threat to their kids and their kids' kids.
Okay, so you have this long simmering conflict, right? Well, on one single day, August 15th, 2010, it explodes. It becomes violent, and it becomes deeply personal. This is the moment everything, and I mean everything, changed for Pablo and his family. I want you to just picture this for a second. You're driving with your family, your wife, your grandson. Suddenly, a truck cuts you off. 15 armed men, their faces covered, drag you out of the driver's seat. They beat you, they blindfold you, and they drive off with you, all while your family is held at gunpoint. There's no arrest warrant, no badges, nothing. Hours later, you're just handed over to the state police and thrown into a prison. And that's exactly how Pablo's life in custody started. So after that violent abduction, the legal battle begins. And right from the get-go, international observers, human rights groups, they're all looking at this and raising some really serious red flags about the case being built against him. I mean, the whole legal case really comes down to this one single staggering contradiction. The prosecution says he committed 2 murders in his community back in 2007. But his defense? They came with receipts. They had witness testimony, even a police certificate proving he was working construction a full 8 hours away on the very day of the crime. You'd think that would be an airtight alibi, right? Case closed. And look, it wasn't just his own lawyers screaming this from the rooftops. The United Nations itself got involved, investigated the case, and their conclusions were just devastating for the prosecution. They flat out called his detention arbitrary. They said the true motive here was his activism. They pointed to huge violations of due process, evidence being totally ignored, massive inconsistencies, and they even found he'd been tortured by officials. This is the UN we're talking about.
So, with the UN basically saying, this is wrong, let him go, you would think that's the end of the story. You'd think he'd be released. But no. In what is just a jaw-dropping move, a Mexican court retries the case, and in March of 2025, they confirmed the original sentence, 30 years in prison.
But this story, it's not just about Pablo in that prison cell. His imprisonment created this devastating ripple effect that completely upended the lives of his entire family. And you can just hear the heartbreak in his own words. It's about the sheer scale of what was lost. It wasn't just his freedom. It was everything he'd built. His home, his life, his place in the community. All of it. Just gone. Think about what this meant for his family. His wife, Yolanda, and their children, they had to flee their home for their own safety. To this day, Yolanda gets death threats simply for seeking justice for her husband. She had to learn Spanish, adapt to a totally new life in the city, ripped away from her Zapotec roots. And their kids, they had to drop out of school and start working to survive. It's just a story of complete cultural uprooting and immense sacrifice.
And as heartbreaking as Pablo's story is on its own, here's what's truly terrifying. It is not an isolated case, not by a long shot. His story is just one piece of a much bigger, much more dangerous pattern that's happening to people who dare to stand up and defend their land.
32. Just let that number hang in the air for a moment. That is the number of environmental and land defenders killed in Mexico in just 1 year, 2024. That statistic makes Mexico one of the deadliest countries on Earth for this kind of work.
And that danger, it isn't some abstract number for Pablo's family. He talks about how after his wife Yolanda visits him in prison, she tells him she's being followed. It just brings it all home, right? It's a constant, terrifying, daily fear that they are forced to live with.
So here we are, 15 years in, multiple trials, international condemnation. You have to wonder, where does this all go from here? Well, the fight for Pablo's freedom is definitely not over.
His legal team is not backing down. They're taking his case to federal judges now, hoping that they can get a fairer shot, away from any local pressures. And Pablo himself has made a direct appeal to Mexico's president, Claudia Sheinbaum. He's asking her to step in, to look into the case of, in his own words, this indigenous Zapotec who has spent nearly 15 years in prison, accused of a crime he did not commit.
And so all of this really leaves us with one big lingering question. When a man can be locked away for decades simply for trying to protect his community's water and forest, it really forces you to ask, what is the actual price of defending our planet? Because for Pablo López Alavez and his family, the cost has been nearly everything.